How do you achieve the stature of being a world-recognized thought leader in global inclusion and diversity? I'm Lynda Katz Wilner, and today we'll find out as I introduce you to Dr. Helen Turnbull, who is a CSP, which is a certified speaking professional, and a global speaking fellow. These designations are the gold standard in the world of professional speaking. Dr. Turnbull has her PhD in human and organizational behavior. She has 2 master's degrees in organizational behavior and mental health counseling and bachelor's degree in psychology and sociology. Dr. Turnbull has unparalleled knowledge on the complexity of inclusion and has done extensive research in this area. She has a deep understanding of the mental health models that contribute to exclusion. She's also the author of 3 online psychometric assessment tools on unconscious bias, gender, and inclusion. And she's also spoken at TEDx on the topic, the illusion of inclusion, of which she also has a book. I read this book and it's a wonderful foundation to help you understand the aspects of diversity. Dr. Helen keynotes on these topics globally. Welcome, Dr. Helen Turnbull.
Thank you, Lynda. I appreciate being here.
Yeah, it's my pleasure, and I look forward to learning more about your experience as being a very successful speaker. And why don't we start with just your background on how you got to this point in your career and your specialty. What is the background to this?
So it's interesting, if we focus on being a keynote speaker, I think being successful, you really do need to bring today rich content. You can't just be a motivational speaker. You need to bring something to the table. But when I really think about how did I get here today, if I go back and think, well, what motivated me to become a keynote speaker? I probably been speaking on stage since I was about 11 years of age. So my first performance, so to speak, was reading poetry at the church hall in Scotland because my parents sent me to elocution lessons. And the importance of that, although I didn't love it at the time, I'll be honest, the importance is that it really taught me to articulate clearly and to be conscious of language in the way that I was speaking. And it gave me confidence that I didn't realize I was going to use in later years. So at some level, the question of being a keynote is maybe 10, 15 years old. And in reality, it's much older than that in terms of my own history. So how did I get here? I've always been in the area of HR. I've always been in the training side of the business, where I was running workshops and training and speaking and not thinking of myself as a professional speaker until I think it was 2006 when I joined the National Speakers Association. And that really was the beginning of me reframing and seeing myself differently, and then learning how to build my business as a speaking business rather than just seeing myself as somebody who occasionally got paid to speak. So that was an important mental transition. And it was also an important piece of my desire for continuous learning.
That's a great point, and it's a common thread that I'm hearing with a lot of the people I speak with. As you know, I am also a member of the National Speakers Association, and it's not just about the speaking, but building your business and how to have a speaking business.
Yes.
And I love what you said about the elocution lessons. I didn't know that about you. And you know, I'm a speech and language pathologist. So sometimes it's not just, do you have a great message and are you motivational? But are you engaging and do people understand you when you're speaking? So it is certainly an important feature to have the technical abilities. And so I'm glad to hear that your parents insisted on that at such an early age. You didn't know at the time how important.
I wanted to take piano lessons, but they sent me to elocution. So I was pretty upset, but I did it.
Very, very interesting. Now, when I look at your website or your even LinkedIn profile, you talk about human facets. Tell me a little bit about what that is.
So I thought about the issue of diversity in the sense of all of us bringing our unique differences to the table as individuals and our differences relative to what I would refer to as social identity groups like race, culture, gender, etc. And I thought, well, diamonds have facets. Diamonds, you know, shine as you move them in the light and you see the different facets. And I thought, well, human beings do also. And so that's why I called my company Human Facets, to recognize the uniqueness of all of us and at the same time, the collective beauty of recognizing our diversity.
That's wonderful imagery. Wonderful imagery with that. And of course, it's diamonds, not emeralds, but it's diamonds.
Right. Yes.
Now, as I mentioned already, I read your book, The Illusion of Inclusion. Tell me a little bit about, first of all, why do you call your book that? What is that illusion that you're talking about?
Yes. So the illusion of inclusion is because I believe that most of us, as well-intentioned people, believe that we behave inclusively. We believe that we want to be included and that we include others. But the reality is we're not always doing that. So I start my keynotes often by saying, I know you believe that you're well-intentioned and that you're behaving inclusively, but what if you're really not? What if it's true that your brain is hardwired for selfishness and similarity and not for diversity and inclusion? And then let's talk about that. So I believe that the word illusion is really challenging us to ask ourselves, am I actually being included? Because one of the things that I also talk about is that companies hire for diversity and manage for similarity. Mm-hmm. And so we bring in diverse people, and then overtly and covertly, in a sense, we do what it takes to ask people, this is what you need to do to survive in this company and in this department and with this boss. And so the environment that we create is not always welcoming of people's differences. So that's why I call the book The Illusion of Inclusion, because I think that we all have work to do regardless of who we are, regardless of our diversity.
And I don't know if I misheard you, but I'm thinking it's not just the illusion of inclusion, but it's a delusion. Did you say delusion or no?
Well, I didn't, but actually you have a point. It is that I think that we sometimes delude ourselves that we're being more inclusive than we really are. So, you know, as a leader, you can have a diverse team and tell yourself, hey, I'm pretty good. I've got diversity around me. But if I come in and interview the people on your team, what am I going to hear? Am I going to hear that everybody feels their voice is valued? Or am I going to hear that you as the leader dominate the conversation and everyone knows what to say to keep you comfortable? So sometimes there's a delusion that I'm doing better than I really am. Because the thing about inclusion, Lynda, is that it's not easy work. The word is a soft word. Nobody ever says, Helen, I don't want to be included, because most of us do want to feel included. But I talk about, as you know from reading the book, the complexity of inclusion, that it's not as simple as it looks. Right. It's not just welcoming people in, it's making them feel valued.
And learning and listening to people. And hearing what they have to say, which of course, that's my interest level too, the communication aspect of it. Now, I know you have spoken all over the world. You've done a lot until COVID, but you've done a lot of travel physically around the world. What are some of the highlights that you can talk about being a speaker who does get to travel a lot? What are some of the highlights or the memorable moments that you think of?
Well, I think I'll answer you in a couple of ways. First of all, I have 6 million air miles. So I've done extensive amounts of traveling over the years. I have to say the last year I haven't missed it. So I'm perfectly fine working with Zoom. And at the same time, there's been lots of highlights, lots of privileges, frankly. I got to travel from Florida to London regularly every month for 6.5 years to work with several clients over there. So I was going home to the UK, which was a privilege for me, and doing work with some great clients. And the other thing is I spent 3.5 to 4 years traveling regularly to Australia and being in Sydney, having an apartment there. So doing the work or speaking keynotes or workshops, etc., is a privilege in itself. Getting to do it in places that you might not visit is an incredible gift. The last time I was in Australia, I spoke in Hobart, Tasmania, which I'd never been in before, and that was just thrilling. With 1,600 people in the audience, and because I had lived in Australia previously, I was able to speak in a way that related to the audience. Because one of the things about being a global speaker, and I know this is a conversation that happens at the national speakers, is the idea that I can take my message to another country, but I take it in a US-centric way. It does not land well. And so the work that it takes to speak in other countries is doing your homework and understanding humor, understanding local nuances, understanding the cultural sensitivities. So I think that's been, I mean, part of it was moving from the US to the UK for me, or moving from the UK to the US was an important lesson in not making assumptions that because I was British and I spoke English that I would easily assimilate to the US culture. And that made me very respectful of wherever I go in the world, is entering in a quiet and humble way in order to learn what is it that's important to people, and not just bringing a message from the US or the UK to impose on people.
So it goes deeper than just the idea of know your audience, not just what your audience's needs are, but their culture, their humor. That's an excellent point.
Yes, it's much deeper actually, Lynda, and it's know yourself in that context too. Because if you come with any, and we all have ego, but you know, I've a good friend of mine who's a CPAE at the National Speakers, from the Speakers Hall of Fame, Bruce Turkell, always talks about it's all about them. It's not about you. So when we're on the platform, the question is, what is your message for the audience? What do they need to hear? Not what you need to tell them, you know?
That's such, and again, I do a lot of coaching and master classes in public speaking, and that's the biggest piece, that it's about them. And that also helps us, because if we think it's about us, we start to be too internal, and that also adds to adding the nerves, which I do want to get to that in a moment. But I know I'm going after something else. You've had wonderful experiences traveling, but I think you've been at certain events or dined with certain people that are probably things you'll never forget. Do you want to share a little bit about that?
Yes, I can. When I lived in the UK, I was president of the Open University Students Association. So I did a lot of public speaking then as president. There were 45,000 student members. And the year I was president was the 10th anniversary of the Open University in the UK. And as a result, I was invited to a celebration where I had lunch with the Queen and Prince Philip and various other dignitaries. And I found myself sitting at a very small table. There were about 1,000 people there at the luncheon, but I was at a table for maybe 6 of us. And I was sitting next to Prince Philip with the Queen's private secretary, I believe it was Michael Heseltine at the time, sitting to my left. And it was an absolutely surreal experience. Prince Philip, I think they saw me staring. They served trout wrapped in aluminum foil. And I thought, I don't know what to do with this. And Michael Heseltine said, just take it off and roll it up. And Prince Philip said, roll it up in a ball and throw it over your shoulder like Henry VIII. And I said, you first, sir. So, so it was quite the experience. I will never forget it. I was also invited the same year to attend the garden party at Buckingham Palace. And that was totally surreal, walking in there. And because I was divorced at the time, I wasn't allowed to bring a partner, a significant other, etc. So I had to walk in there alone. And You need quite a lot of composure when everybody, the whole crowd is staring at you. They think you're somebody and you're like, I don't know who it was really surreal, but a huge privilege, huge.
That's wonderful. And that was early. That was early in your career.
Yes, I was probably, I'm going to say 27, 28.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Was there a turning point? Was there a point in your career, Helen, where all of a sudden, or Dr. Helen, where all of a sudden there's the change in the trajectory that you started realizing that I'm really starting to do this all around the world? Was there any moment of clarity with that?
That's an interesting question. I don't know if there was, in terms of, because I've always spoken around the world as in my career. And at the same time, I do think that national speakers helped me to, I remember the day I sat there at the Influence Conference early on in my membership and watched people on the main stage. And I thought, man, I want to do that one day. And I thought, well, hold on a minute, you're doing it, Helen. You're just not framing yourself in that way. So from that minute on, I A, saw myself as a keynote speaker, and B, started changing my marketing and offering keynotes to my clients. And I do think that changed everything. It got me business doing that. And I do think it's important, Lynda, because I've said it, but there are motivational speakers and then there are content-rich speakers. And I think more and more and more people are looking for content. So that I think what keeps me fresh and in demand is having rich content that is much needed in today's climate around talking about the issues of diversity and unconscious bias, and not just hanging out my shingle because it's fashionable, but having been in this work since 1985. So,
and that's a great point, because I was going to ask you, can anybody be a keynote speaker? And so you're saying maybe they can try to be, but you have research behind you, right? You can talk about research and studies to explain things.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about that. Do you think anybody who says, I lost my job, I have always wanted to influence people, I'm going to be a keynote speaker?
Yeah, so I don't think you can just suddenly declare yourself a keynote speaker. I think that if you want to do that, then you have to go back to school in a sense, join the national, go to Toastmasters, join the National Speakers Association. And the difference between Toastmasters and NSA for me is Toastmasters will teach you how to speak without all the ums and ahs, etc. And the cadence of your speaking, whereas the national speakers will teach you how to manage the business of speaking, manage your marketing campaign, etc. Look at the technology that you need in this Zoom environment. Can anybody do it? Part of me says yes, anyone who's willing to do the work can do it. And at the same time, there are people who are just not confident, and there are people that don't have content. Don't declare yourself a keynote speaker if you just want to tell your own story, because people aren't going to be that interested.
And I think on the other hand, Dr. Helen, and we hear this a lot in NSA, just pick your lane. Don't try to be a speaker about every topic. So if somebody says, Dr. Helen, do you speak about burnout in the workplace? Well, if you really don't, perhaps you can recommend somebody else. But there are some people out there who might say, sure, I'll figure it out. And I know there've been conversations in NSA about that, particularly in the area of diversity.
Yes.
Right?
I do think picking your lane and staying in your lane is important. So I don't think you have credibility if you try to do everything. If you can't describe what you speak about in a few sentences, then you probably need to go back to the drawing board and think again.
Well, and also, if you can't speak about it, but if I can't think of Dr. Helen Turnbull, what does she speak about? You've become successful if I get that right away and I know what the topic is. And I don't start talking about all these other topics. And my thought is that the most successful people do pick their lane and stay in their lane.
Yeah.
And they have rich experience and hopefully research to back them up. So you know that they are the subject matter expert as well as a keynote speaker.
Yes.
Great points. Now, I do a lot of work, as I told you, with master classes and public speaking and helping people. Tell me a little bit about what, as an experienced speaker, what are some of the things you do to prepare for a keynote?
Hmm. I do a lot of work to prepare, actually. You know, sometimes people will think that we get paid a lot of money for 1 hour. And I put hours, days, in fact, of my time into preparation of every keynote. So the first thing is that I spend a lot of time on Zoom calls with the client, trying to understand their audience, trying to understand what the messages they want. Always ask, what would success look like? What would success look like at the end of my keynote if you felt that I had delivered the message that people wanted to hear or needed to hear? So I will have several meetings with them, and not just one introductory meeting. I will then take, and obviously there's material that we use again and again. I get that. But I will customize for the client. I'm not necessarily customizing my messages, but I'm making sure it's heard in the language and the culture of the actual client. So I actually work, because I do use slides because of my research, and I share data from the cumulative data from my online assessment tools to make the point that we do have work to do in the area of unconscious bias and inclusion, that I do use slides. And at the same time, I try to make sure that the slides don't have lots of words on them. I'm always tweaking them right up until the last minute. So I'm never happy. I mean, I think that's part of it, is that I'm never satisfied to just say, oh, I've done this before. I can, this is a breeze. It's never a breeze for me. Do I get anxious? Yes and no. Not anymore in the real sense of the word, but you're always anxious when you're about to speak to a huge audience. And interestingly, on Zoom, I've been speaking to audiences between 2,000 and 9,000 recently. That's a bigger audience than I've ever spoken to. But when you're on Zoom, it doesn't feel like you're speaking to that many people because you can't see them anyway. But the other thing is, in terms of this Zoom environment, Lynda, is that making sure I have the right equipment. I am constantly trying to learn more. I went out and did the eSpeakers virtual certification. I have the correct lighting, the correct microphones, good sound, etc. Haven't quite mastered that ATM Mini that everybody's talking about. So I'm still working on it. You know, I last night attended the North Dallas chapter meeting where they were talking about marketing and sales and the use of technology. So I continue to place myself in the place of a continuous learner. I don't feel I've ever learned enough. And that's all part of my preparation.
And that's a good thing, because we need to keep learning so we're not stale. And if anything, 2020 has taught us that.
Yes, yes.
And again, I see many people who get on a Zoom webinar and they think, well, it's only Zoom. And we need to deliver just as well, if not better, because we don't have the energy of seeing the people, but we still have to deliver the same way, and we're still getting paid to deliver.
Yes.
So
I think, sorry, Lynda, another important point there is you have to be yourself, you know, because I am not Dan Thurman, for example. I can't balance on the podium upside down. That's his thing. And at the same time, there are speakers who like to stand and move around. I don't do that. First of all, I don't have enough space behind me, but I'm comfortable sitting in the Zoom environment and delivering a message that's compelling. So I think that you have to, in our industry, in the keynote speaking business, not feel compelled to copy everyone else, but find your own style, get centered in who you are, and deliver from that core rather than trying to be someone you're not.
That's a wonderful point. And there's something with Zoom or virtual meetings or whatever platform you use, the intimacy of being up close and personal to everybody in the audience. That's a different feature too. So they're really looking at your expressions and your smiles and your connection with the camera, which is a skill unto itself, that we
Right.
have to get used to because we can't scan the audience like we've done before.
Right.
So
Exactly.
are there any rituals that you have, Dr. Helen, like just a ritual before, like I always have to do this before I start my keynote? Do you have anything like that?
Not really rituals, no, but the one thing, and this is probably more personal than you asked, but because I suffer from allergies, I always have to make sure I take an allergy pill just about 30 minutes before I speak. That's a source of that's more of a source of anxiety to me than what I'm going to speak about. So it's ritualistic in the sense that I try to remember to do it, but it's not, you know, I don't carry a starfish in my pocket or anything. No, I'm good. I'm pretty comfortable with who I am. I also think too that one of my secret weapons, and I know you'll resonate with this, is my accent, and that people like my accent, and people often say to me, "Oh, I could listen to you all day," and I'm like, "Oh, okay." I don't hear it, believe it or not, but I know that other people do.
And again, because, you know, I do a lot of work with helping people who have foreign accents, not eliminate them, but modify them as long as they're understandable. And
Yeah.
as long as it's not the distraction where all they're doing is listening to your accent and not getting your message.
Right.
So, and clearly with your accent, that's not the case. It's a charming accent. And so it adds something special and unique about you that somebody else may not have.
That's
And
right.
that goes back to what you were saying, is embrace your own self and who you are and how you come across. You don't have to sound like everybody else, just like you don't have to do the tricks, you know, or play the guitar or sing the song, or, you know, so
Or
many
tell the
speakers
joke, right?
tell a joke. Exactly.
Yeah.
And that, now that you mention that, what is your thought about humor in your presentations? Is that something you strive for?
No, I do not. I don't believe in telling jokes unless you're a humorist. And most really brilliant humorists are not telling jokes, they're telling stories. I mean, Jeannie Robertson, she's amazing. I hang on every word she says. Her stories are so compelling. And she's funny, but she's naturally funny. And I know that she works very hard. I don't try to be funny, but I am in many ways naturally funny. My British sense of humor will come out quite often. And there'll sometimes be a delayed reaction in the audience as they think, "Oh, did she really just say that?" And then they'll laugh. But no, I don't tell jokes. In fact, I was in a session a couple of weeks ago where one of the questions to the group was, "So what's the joke that you use on the platform?" And I'm like, I don't. And a couple of people shared stories, and I'm like, I would never tell these jokes from the platform. I think sometimes you're at risk of them being inappropriate.
Absolutely. And again, it's know your audience, and
Yeah.
telling a joke is not the same thing as just talking about a funny story or laughing at yourself.
Right.
That's different, but telling a joke runs that risk of
Yeah,
falling flat or offending somebody. And
absolutely.
how do you
Yes.
get back from that if that's how you
And with my subject matter, Lynda, I would not risk doing that, you know. So.
Absolutely. Helen, do you have any advice for new speakers that you haven't already said? I know you talked about learn, get practice, learn about how to run a business. You mentioned Toastmasters. Anything else that you would recommend people do or think about if they want to be a professional speaker?
Well, I mean, obviously I'm biased in the sense that I would recommend that they join Toastmasters and or they join the National Speakers Association as an associate speaker, because if you're not a professional speaker yet, then you can still join, and then you join the academy so that you begin to learn the business of speaking. I think that's critically important. And I also think my advice is be realistic with yourself. You're not going to make six-figure fees overnight. So if you want to be an emerging speaker, you have to think about, am I going to do this based on still having a job and doing this on the side as I learn? Am I giving up now and hoping, throwing myself into it and hoping it all works? But I think really it's equivalent to saying, I'm going back to school to do another master's degree. It is that you have to do your homework. You have to learn about the complexity of professional speaking.
And that brings a question that I always have. I consider myself a subject matter expert as opposed to a keynote speaker. Can you talk a little bit about what you see as differences, or if you do see differences with it?
Well, I think the difference is, are you being hired as a keynote speaker? Because you can have subject matter experts who are coaches who work with individual clients, or subject matter experts who run workshops. And they are definitely speaking, but the difference is maybe they're facilitating rather than speaking. And I do both. So I really understand the value of having, for example, a 2-day workshop on gender, where my main role is to facilitate the group discussion with occasional lecture pieces in between, as distinct from being hired, paid, and seen as a keynote speaker. So I do see the difference is that it's a very different expertise to be able to stand on a platform in front of an audience of X number, 200 to 2000, and be able to hold their attention with what you are saying for the entire 60 minutes or 18 minutes if it's a TED Talk. Shorter is more difficult, by the way, because you have to be more concise. But I think that you can be both. But you have to be clear what you're bringing to the table. Your message, you have to have content. I don't believe even motivational speakers have content because they're doing their homework to figure out, what they want to say to their audience. But I think today more and more clients are looking for people with content. And, when someone says, give me the 3 tips for keynote speakers, I would say content, content, and content, because in a sense, it's important that nobody wants to pay you to come there and say nothing, or to have the audience think, I'm bored, or have the audience think, no, I don't agree with that. So,
Which makes me think the other part that we didn't mention that I know, and I do, and that's not just the content, but engagement. You can't get up there and just talk at a group of people.
Right.
You want to engage them. Even if they're not talking, you have to find some way to engage them so that they do pay attention.
Yes. In actual fact, on that count, I use live polling throughout my keynotes so that they're voting and they are engaged and they can see the results. One of the reasons I do that is to have the engagement. But the other reason I do it is to help my audience see, oh, there's differences just in this group in terms of points of view around diversity, whatever the topic is I'm asking about. I don't do a whole lot of raise your hand if you think this, or raise your hand if you think that. I don't like to do things that feel inauthentic to me. I know they work for other people because they do it naturally, but if it doesn't feel right for me, then I'm not going to use it with my audience.
And your subject matter is more sensitive than some other topics. I may not be willing to raise my hand about some question you might ask, but I might type it in or do it some way that's anonymous. This has been wonderful, all these questions, all these answers that you have and the insight that you have, because you truly are a successful speaker, globally successful. If people do want to get in touch with you or learn more about you, what can they do, Dr. Helen?
Thank you. 2 things. One is my website is drhelenturnbull.com is my keynote website. And my business website is humanfacets.com. And my business email is just Dr. Helen Turnbull, my name, no dots, no spaces, at humanfacets.com.
Well, thank you so much for your expertise. And I just always love the new answers and the experiences that whoever I may interview has as a successful speaker. So thank you again. And stay tuned for another episode of Successful Speakers, where we bring successful speakers right here, have conversations, so you can learn what it takes to be a successful speaker.